As tensions heat up before and around Berlin, the United States Congress and the President signed the National Security Act of 1947 into law. The National Security Act establishes a National Security Council of intelligence, military, and political leaders of the United States that meets frequently to discuss world affairs to make sure that we are not going to get snuck up on by events. There is a national security advisor who reports to the president, and during the Cold War, for about 40 years, the president saw the national security advisor pretty much daily. But that's not all. National Security Act 47 also establishes the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, which is America's spy service, our version of the KGB or the NKVD, our secret service, our spy service. But the CIA is tasked with one very, very simple rule. You can operate anywhere in the world except the United States. The United States is off limits because the CIA plays hardball. It engages in espionage, in false information, in assassination, and at times in the overthrow of political enemies and the overthrow of national governments. The CIA has done it all in the service of protecting the free world from communism. But these guys fight a long twilight struggle, which is what the Cold War itself is called, a long twilight struggle against communism. And the methods that they use are not pretty. We also established the new Department of Defense. The old departments of the Navy and the Army, or the Navy and War, are going to be subsumed. In the Department of Defense, you've got a Secretary of Defense and a Joint Chiefs of Staff that are the heads of the various military branches. Army, Navy. Well, now we have a new branch, the Air Force. As a result of this reorganization, the Army Air Corps and the Navy Air Forces are going to be combined. Actually, I was wrong. The Army Air Forces are going to be separated from the ground pounders and form a new branch of the military designed to maintain aerospace superiority over any battlefield anywhere on Earth. So we've got an Army for big-scale land combat, a Navy that's designed to fight on and from the sea, which includes a Navy Air Force on carriers and Marines. We have the Air Force, designed for air superiority, strategic bombing, and that sort of thing. We also have the Coast Guard, which is designed to patrol America's waters and to deal with river travel and things like that. Finally, after as the Berlin airlift is winding down, a new treaty organization is established which breaks precedent. George Washington had warned us against establishing permanent alliances. No overseas alliances, he said in his farewell address. Well, now we have a permanent overseas alliance, the first of many. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, is established to fight anywhere that one of their nations is attacked. An attack on one is an attack on all. What this is a declaration to the Soviets. There will not be any time between you attacking Norway, Denmark, Western Germany, Luxembourg, Belgium, Holland, France, Italy, Britain, later Spain and Portugal. Later France pulls out for a while. But Greece, there will be no pause. An attack on any one of these NATO powers will immediately involve American and Canadian forces as well on day one. In fact, the NATO military structure has an American Supreme Commander for the land battle, the sea battle, the air battle, and the overall commander of NATO is an American general. So Western Europe becomes part of an alliance with the United States, a permanent alliance, or at least so far a permanent, an alliance that still exists, designed to keep the Russians, to keep the communists, out of Western Europe. The Soviets reply a few years later by the Warsaw Pact, named after the capital city of Poland. And the Warsaw Pact is their version of NATO. It is a communist alliance between the Soviet Union and its colonies. The colonies that the Soviets established in Eastern Europe are called satellite states, and they include East Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria. The Soviets, of course, reabsorbed Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and they moved the Polish border westward. So Europe is now in two armed camps the way it was before World War I. But unlike before World War I, there are outside powers dominating the European powers. The Europeans in the West are working for an American general, and they are part of an American system of defense, even though they are politically and economically quite independent from us. In the East, the Russians control their area like a spider controls everything in its web. And at any time, full-scale war could open up at the Fulda Gap between West and East Germany and involve the world in a World War III. And this immediacy is going to help prevent a war, and it's also going to threaten big war if it actually happens. Now, there's something else that I didn't have on here, which I will include right now, and that is atomic and hydrogen bombs. After the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Russians are clear that the Americans are willing to use these weapons on targets filled with people. And the Americans from 1945 have a nuclear monopoly. The Soviets do not have atomic bombs. But they do have a very good spy network of communists within American colleges and American government bureaucracies, including in the Manhattan Project, which built us the atomic bombs. A guy named Klaus Fuchs among them, and the Rosenbergs, a husband and wife team of Red spies, who provide the Soviets as well as they can with our atomic secrets. Now, we had taken steps in the Manhattan Project. They tried to make sure that even their janitorial staff were completely functionally illiterate so that you wouldn't have janitors going through the ash cans every night looking for secret papers that they could smuggle out and then send away to Moscow. But because of this, the Russians are really afraid. Now, the Americans, after World War II, have the greatest Navy and the greatest Air Force, and we have one of the greatest armies. But we quickly reduce our military spending, especially on our army, to peacetime levels. The Soviets increase. They keep spending at wartime levels, with the result being that by 1947-48, the Russians have the army that beat Hitler, the most powerful land force in human history. And the West has a bunch of shadow forces and Navy and air power, but on the ground, very, very weak. But we also have the only atom bombs. So policy is established of massive retaliation. If the Russians invade, we're going to use atom bombs on them right away. Well, we have them, they don't. However, thanks to the communist infiltration, remember, Joe McCarthy was an obnoxious demagogue, but he wasn't wrong about certain American institutions being infiltrated by communist spies. There was an American diplomat named Alger Hiss, who was very well thought of, who perjured himself as part of a series of investigations by the House Un-American Activities Committee, which was clued in by a former communist agent named Whittaker Chambers to Hiss's involvement in underground clandestine communist activity working for the Red Army. And Hiss perjured himself, which is something an innocent person probably would not have done. Julius and Ethel Rosenberg send the atomic secrets. Fuchs sends the atomic secrets. And in 1949, the Russians have their own atom bomb now. So now they have the most powerful land force and tactical air force in the world. We have the most powerful Navy and strategic air force in the world, and now we both have atomic bombs. We started increasing our defense spending as part of our NATO commitment. Atomic bombs, as horrible as they are, aren't enough. Edward Teller, an American scientist who was a part of the Manhattan Project, breaks with his old boss, Dr. Robert Oppenheimer, who has become a vocal opponent of nuclear weapons, and says that the United States can develop the world's first hydrogen bomb. An atomic bomb splits a uranium atom or a plutonium atom and causes a few kilotons of explosive damage. For example, the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs caused about 15 kilotons worth of damage, 15,000 tons of TNT equivalent, plus radiation. If you were to drop an atomic bomb on the Coeur d'Alene Resort, the crater would go out as far as the NIC campus, and the damage, blast damage, would go out as far as the Hayden area and the Post Falls area, and radiation would go wherever the wind goes. Hydrogen bomb involves the smashing together of the fusion of hydrogen atoms, which is the motive power of the sun. And it emits its explosive power not in kilotons, but in megatons. That's millions of tons of TNT. If a typical hydrogen bomb were dropped on the Coeur d'Alene Resort, the crater would go out to the Hayden line. The blast effects would go out as far as Athol and Rathdrum, and the radiation would be much, much, much greater. Atom bombs can destroy human civilization. Hydrogen bombs can destroy all life on Earth. We developed the first hydrogen bomb early in the 1950s. But again, our institutions are infiltrated by communist spy networks that ship that information off to the Russians, and within 2 years, the Russians have their own H-bomb. Now we are truly in a balance of terror, the United States and the Soviet Union. But this balance of terror is one of the things that helps keep the peace. The fear of atomic reprisal, the fear of nuclear annihilation, becomes more and more real as more and more of hydrogen weapons are built. The Russian leadership, thank God, had lived through the horrors of World War II, and many of them in their childhood remember World War I and the Russian Civil War. They had lived through Stalin. They understood that they wanted to expand, but they wanted to expand short of war. They didn't want to experience that again. The American leadership largely had experienced not as bad things, but similar things. Gone through World War I, the Depression, World War II, and so forth. We didn't want to go through another world war either for a bunch of reasons, and nobody who's sane wants to risk the destruction of all life on Earth. One of the real dangers in the current situation is that the Red Chinese leadership has no experience with any of this. They also have atomic weapons. They have an increasingly varied stockpile as the wealth of China has increased. But the Chinese leadership have no personal experience with war or defeat. The last time China was involved in a major war was Korea back in 1953. The last time China was involved in a minor war was with the North Vietnamese or the Vietnamese in 1979-80. The Chinese have no living memory of any of this. The Chinese leadership is arrogant and amateurish. And they honestly believe that if they are bold, they can push the West out and become Zhengguo again, the Middle Kingdom, not just for East Asia, but for the entire world, the dominant power on Earth, eclipsing and displacing the West, not just the United States, but Judeo-Christian Western civilization. But because they have no personal memory of the devastation of horrible war, they are capable of making aggressive calculations that could result in us needing to respond. The Russians never pushed things beyond a certain point. The jury is still out on what the Chinese will do.